I'm Linda Scherzer, Director of the CRC, the Government Affairs and Israel Advocacy Wing of the Jewish Federation of Greater Metro West. Earlier today, I'm proud to say that upwards of 1,200 people in our community marched in solidarity with Israel at a rally in Livingston. This afternoon, we come together to learn more about what just happened these last 2 weeks in Israel, why, after 5 relatively quiet years, Hamas reignited its war against the Jewish state, how social media has planted gross mistruths, spread a shallow understanding of a highly complex story, and fired up hateful comments against Israel across the globe. Finally, we'll discuss what we can do and must do to counter this skewed picture, whether on TikTok or Facebook, on college campus or Capitol Hill. ILead was created 3 years ago with the purpose of helping to prepare our high school students for the challenges they would one day face on college campus. As all of us know, far too many campuses have become places of toxic anti-Israel activity. Our young people, 50 of whom registered for today's program, need the tools, confidence, and clarity to be able to stand up for their beliefs, claim seats at progressive tables if they choose to, without checking their Zionism at the door, and of course, fight back against shameful and unacceptable anti-Semitism. Because of what just happened in Israel, we know that adults are also looking to make sense of this. So we open the program up to the general community and welcome more than 100 plus adults into today's program. We've kept our 3 special breakouts for teens. No worries, Gen Z, your parents will not be in those rooms. We will be putting them into a separate breakout room just for adults. Before I introduce Neil Lazarus, our keynote speaker, I want to invite Michal Tzur, Jewish Federation's awesome global connections professional who lives with her family on Kibbutz Erez on the border with Gaza, to say a few words. Michal, it's after 11 o'clock in Israel, 3 days since the ceasefire. Thank you for staying up to be with us. Please tell us how you and your kids are doing and a little bit of what you went through these last 2 weeks.
Shalom, everyone. Thanks for having me and thanks for joining this great and so important program tonight. So I live in Kibbutz Erez. It's a small settlement by the border with Gaza. We have about 200 families here and about 500 people altogether living in the kibbutz. Usually it's the best place on earth, the best place to raise kids, to live, to be a teenager, just to enjoy the beauty of this landscape. What happened in the past two weeks was different. We're used to rounds of escalation. We're used to getting missiles from the Gaza Strip. We're used to this situation, but this time it was different. This time it was more severe, more intense. About 7,000 rockets were fired towards Israel altogether. About 70 of them were aimed specifically at my home, at the kibbutz. The photos that you see here tonight are not taken by professional photographers or by the media or by the IDF spokesman. It was all taken by our people, some of them with my kids, my neighbors. And what you see here is the reality of our lives. Life on the kibbutz by the border forces you to have a safe room in your house. And what happened on Monday is that we started getting the alerts, the Tseva Adom, the red color alerts, and it became more and more intense. By Tuesday, the roads were blocked. We weren't able to leave or to get into the kibbutz. If you wanted to leave, you had to go through the fields and plantations. On Tuesday, we also had mortar shells fired at us and some anti-tanks rockets missiles that were aimed towards civilian targets in the nearby moshavim and settlements. And we would get notifications: stay in your house, close the door, go to the safe room and stay there, sometimes for hours, just because there were warnings and intelligence saying that these missiles are aimed towards us. On Wednesday, the tanks joined the area. We had some IDF tanks surrounding the kibbutz and firing towards Gaza. So you can just imagine the noise, the commotion, the intensity of sitting in a closed room and hearing all the bombing around you. You get the alerts, you get the launching of the missiles, you get the Iron Dome interception, you get the tanks, you get the mortar shells. It's a lot of noise. I'm raising here my two kids, Eitan, who's 9 years old, and Maya, who's 7 years old. And at a certain point, I realized they cannot take it anymore. It was too much for them. And we left the kibbutz. All the photos that you see of the kids smiling and drinking and having ice cream, it was already outside the kibbutz. We had to leave. We had to pack in about 30 minutes and just leave. And we were wandering around Israel, starting in the Golan Heights, then moving to Jerusalem and other places for 10 days, without knowing when we can go back and what will we find when we get back. The damage in the area is huge, between fires and missiles hitting the surrounding of the kibbutz and the avocado plantation and some kindergarten in other kibbutzim. The damage is big. But besides the damage to the concrete and the buildings, there's the emotional effect that we don't know yet how and for how long it will affect. We already know the teens that grow up here in the kibbutz, which are very strong kids and very active and happy kids usually. We see the effect in their success in matriculations and in final exams that they dropped dramatically in the past 10 years. We see how they're unable to function in other, when they progress in life and they want to go to school, they want to go to university, they want to go to elite units in the army. They're not succeeding because something in their resilience is hurt, is affected, and we see how it changes them. I asked my daughter, she expressed some anxiety, and I asked her to draw how she feels. And she drew a picture of her heart, and she said, my heart is sometimes it's too strong, and sometimes it's too weak. And she drew a picture of her mouth, and she said, my breathing is not normal. I feel that my breathing has changed in the past 10 days. And she drew the third picture of her head, and she said, my head is full of noise. I can't get rid of this noise. And again, she's 7 years old. You saw her picture with her friend when we got to the respite place, and you know, she got reunited with her friend. So on one hand, we try to keep their childhood continuing as usual and just pretended that we were vacationing in the past 10 days, traveling and hiking and kayaking and having fun. On the other hand, we know that it's not real. We know that it's not usual. We know that things are dramatically changed. This photo, the two kids at the bus stop are my son and his friend, my son Eitan and his friend Alon. This morning, we were sending them back to school, and the bus stop that they're standing next to is protected. It's built out of a very, very thick concrete wall, because in case of another alert, they have less than 15 seconds, which is nothing. This is the time they have to find shelter. This is the time they have to find a safe place and hide. So again, when Neil will talk later about how to explain the situation and how to talk about it, but just keep in mind those photos, the behind the scenes, what we see from our house, our neighborhood, the reality that we face. It's different. It's not normal. What we really want to do is just go back to our normal life. So it's been 3 days of ceasefire, and we really hope that it will keep, and that the slogan that is written now behind the kids, Ani ve'ata neshane et ha'olam, it says, you and I can change and will change the world. And I hope that this is what will happen, that we will be able to create a better reality for our kids and for the neighbor kids and for everyone, just to live together peacefully. So thank you again. I'm really happy to be back home after 10 days. And I thank the community of Greater Metro West for the support and the friendship and by the way, you've seen the photos, also the soldiers. We had 130 soldiers moving into the kibbutz in the past 10 days. The community raised money to feed them and to spoil them and to get them treats for Shabbat. So these are the photos that you see. So thank you very much for joining, for listening. And I admire your efforts and your work, the work that you do to tell the story of what's going on here. Toda.
Michal, thank you so much for sharing with us tonight. And I know I express the feelings of all of us when I say that we are so incredibly sorry for all that you and your children and the entire state of Israel had to go through. And as I think most people on the Zoom know, yours is a partner community with the Jewish Federation of Greater Metro West. We are behind you. We support you. We love you. We will be there with you as you rebuild. And of course, we wish you a quiet night. We hope you catch up on sleep this evening, and of course, many peaceful days ahead of you. Thank you. So it's now my pleasure to introduce Neil Lazarus, an old friend. Neil is an expert in the fields of Middle East politics, public diplomacy, and media and communications. In normal non-COVID years, Neil meets with thousands upon thousands of birthright students, foreign diplomats, and others to explain Israel's complicated reality. He's here today to discuss the current situation with Hamas and the reasons behind the outbreak of hostilities. About 25, 30 minutes into Neil's presentation, perhaps even earlier, he's going to take some questions from the audience. So please put those in chat. You can direct them to me, Linda Scherzer, and I'll be reviewing those questions and posing them to Neil. Neil, thank you again for being with us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Linda. I'm just going to share my screen so everybody can see it. When we look at, what I want to try and show you today is how much the mythology that's been created around this conflict, especially on the Western media, that it was to do with an area called Sheikh Jarrah and Jews moving into Palestinian houses and ethnic cleansing, or claims of disproportionate use of force by Israel. I want to talk cold politics and talk about what actually happened. Why now? What kicked off this major escalation, as Michal was saying, that we haven't seen now for a number of years, and at such a proportion, when we were seeing rockets being fired at around 140 to 150 within a few minutes. Israel hadn't seen that rate of fire before. So if we maybe start and go back, and I remind you of some of the events. There's about five or six different factors, I would argue, came together to spark off the events. This happened, first of all, in Ramadan. Ramadan is a remarkably sensitive period in the Middle East. It's a sensitive period in Jerusalem, especially as Muslims go to pray during the holy month. Now, again, one of the things I heard and kind of nearly laughed out loud was Israel was preventing Muslims praying at the on the dome of the on the Temple Mount, etc. We had at its peak around 87,000 people praying at any one time. That's a pretty big soccer stadium. You had a potential risk because tensions were high. Now, there were mistakes which were made. There were a number of mistakes which were made, I think quite openly, we can say, by the Israeli police, preventing people sitting at Damascus Gate, which was a normal place that people were sitting. All of that isn't the reason particularly why there was a conflict now. If we have a look, we need to look at what was going on with the Palestinians, the Palestinian elections. I remind you that President Biden comes to power. Again, I'm about to break a rule. I'm going to say Trump and Biden in the same breath to Americans. I know we'll start an argument. I'm just analyzing. I'm not making any political statements here. So Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas, the chief of the Palestinian Authority, commits to President Biden with a new presidency that he would go to elections. First time they've had elections in what, I think 14, 15 years. Now, what happens in the prelude to the elections is important. It becomes very clear that Abu Mazen, who's the leader of Fatah, one of the groups, was in trouble. A couple of things were taking place. Hamas was getting stronger in the West Bank. Two, the Fatah movement of Abu Mazen split. You not only had Hamas fighting Fatah, sometimes literally in the streets or at least demonstrating, you had a lot of new groups emerging, independents and split-offs from Fatah itself. Some of the names you may know, I don't know how much it comes across in the West now, someone like Marwan Barghouti, powerful figure in Israeli prison, standing for presidency. Abu Mazen feared that he was going to lose, so he calls off the elections. Now, he uses a pretext, which we've seen before, that Israel wasn't going to allow the Israeli Arabs of East Jerusalem to vote. Happy to answer questions on that. That was the case because by allowing East Jerusalem Arabs to vote, it gives access and authority of that Palestinian authority to Jerusalem. Bottom line, he calls off the elections, blaming Israel. That's the environment you've got to get at. Why? Because it's Ramadan. Two, there's hostility around Damascus Gate and bad policing. Three, the story of Sheikh Jarrah. Now, again, there's a lot here. Sheikh Jarrah, in two sentences. Sheikh Jarrah is in East Jerusalem. I remind you, Jerusalem's divided into two. There's East and there's West. United capital of the Jewish people, yes. The reality is there's an East and a West Jerusalem. I remind you that East Jerusalem, up until 1967, was under the control of the Jordanians. So the area of Sheikh Jarrah, and particularly the property there, was being owned by Jews up until the War of Independence in 1967. In the War of Independence, Jordan takes control. To cut a long story short, there's an argument which has been going on for, so, I remember it when I was thin, it's been going on for so long, that over who owns the land. Does it belong to, who owns the property? Does it belong to the Palestinians now living in those houses, or does it belong to Jews who had a legal claim to it pre-state? I don't think you can say that the Sheikh Jarrah, this area, was the cause of the violence. Because if it was, why didn't it take place before? This has been going on, like I said, for a decade. Something else happened, like I said, Palestinian politics. It became, how they say, a raison d'etre, a reason for attack. The Jews are taking Palestinians out of their houses. Jerusalem is under threat. Riots start. Now, we know the instructions were given to, they're not people praying, they're protesters, they're provocateurs on the Temple Mount to start violence. Rocks were being already stowed within the temple, and violence takes place. Violence starts taking place outside of the old city. Let me just give you a glance.
עכשיו כל הציורים האלה מתפזרים לכל עבר.
violence continues. Look, so we'll talk about this more when we get into the breakup groups, but this mythology of peaceful demonstrators, peaceful people just praying, and the Israeli police is pure propaganda. There was a decision made by Hamas to challenge the authority of the Palestinian authority of Abu Mazen around the issue of Jerusalem. Spoiler, if you have a look at what happens at the end of this, Hamas has been successful. Hamas doesn't care about its own people, so that doesn't matter. Hamas doesn't care about Gaza, that doesn't matter. But what they have done is they've challenged Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas, Fatah in its leadership of the Palestinian people to say today Hamas can turn around and say, we took on the Israelis. We made Michal Zor personally leave her home. Okay, those people around areas, those people there, we Hamas took on the Jews. They were on the run. We Hamas are now running the battle for Jerusalem. Now, for a young generation, for a frustrated generation and an increasingly religious generation, that's an attractive call. For me, it wasn't the anger in the eyes of the demonstrators of East Jerusalem, which was so frightening. It was the hope. Because what Hamas did was they took the frustration, they took religious zealotry and moved it against Israel to take that leadership, if you like, of the struggle of the Palestinians. Now, take all of that and let's have a look a little bit how it goes to Gaza. For the first time, Hamas takes the battle out of this enclave called the Gaza Strip, tries to ignite the West Bank, but doesn't succeed to. There weren't mass demonstrations. They didn't lose control. They could have done if the ceasefire hadn't taken place. But in Gaza, we start to see some successes. Now, already we know that there had been demonstrations on the Gaza border. They re-emerged. We saw all of these local towns being hit. But it wasn't only that. Tel Aviv was hit. Even remember, the whole area started with Jerusalem under fire. Now I'm going to show you, because I think this is the best way I can show it to you, is 3 different clips from Hamas. Because in those clips, you will understand a little bit where they're coming from. Understanding's not agreeing. Don't misunderstand me. Okay, Hamas is a genocidal organization, which is jihadist. Okay, but their propaganda says a lot. So let's have a look, first of all, at the following. Their missiles. So I think this was Islamic Jihad. قبل القصف لا وقفت أقدام الخوف الوعد الصادق موعدكم وخطاب السيد بالحرف انتظروا موتا يرعبكم والأرجل ترجف بالنصف العين بالعين ستؤخذ واحدة بمقابل 1000 وعلى العدو أن يفهم تماما ما أقول ورجال مقاومة قسمت سترد الموت بما يكفي وقوافل مصر تتبعنا والزحف ينادي للزحف لا نخشى الموت نقابله ما دام النعش على الكتف انتظروا موتا يرعبكم والأرجل ترجف بالنصف العين بالعين ستؤخذ واحدة بمقابل 1000. I think you get the idea. What you start to see is some of the weaponry they have there. Again, the ability of Hamas to build weaponry, to hide weaponry, and to create a metro system is huge. Now, the second clip I wanted to show you is as follows. Here it talks about something very simple. The balloons that are coming across and starting again.
بدينا يقاتلون بأنهم ظلموا وأن الله على نصرهم لقدير. نحن في الشباب الثائر أحفاد الناصر في إطار جهادنا المستمر لهذا العدو الجبان، وردا على انتهاكاته التي يرتكبها بحق المسجد الأقصى، وقراراته التي يصدرها كل يوم بإغلاق المسجد الأقصى والحرم الإبراهيمي، وقرار ضم الضفة الغربية مع الأغوار. نحن في الشباب الثائر يعني لنا دور في كل، نحن عنوان المرحلة هذه، ونحن سنكون يعني دوما بالمرصاد لهم. فأدواتنا البسيطة أوجعنا غلاف غزة، أوجعنا كيان صهيوني كامل استنزفناه، قد ما نقدر حنكون نوجع الاحتلال بأي وسيلة، بأي يعني وين إلنا إيش إلنا أداة لازم نوجع فيها الاحتلال حنوجع فيه الاحتلال.
Let me show you one last thing. I want to show you one last thing. The balloons, by the way, which we saw, don't underestimate. I don't know whether, Michal, you had a problem with that. You did. And maybe, I don't know if you want to just say 30 seconds, but it's a real problem because they fly across. And often, you know, children such as Michal's children's age will see a balloon come across. They've got explosive attached to them. They've got bombs attached. If they land, they kill, they maim, or they start fires. Now, this last clip I have to show you, and I know we're limited of time, but this came out, I think it was 2 days ago by Hamas. For me, there is no better illustration of what they built. Now, I remind you that all of this concrete was allowed in by Israel for building houses, for building hospitals, for building a Gaza which would be better for the Gazans. And what they're doing is creating a metro system of death. These are, it's not, I hate the word tunnel. You say tunnel, you think of a rabbit, all right? This is an underground system which were allowing troops to move, allowing weaponry to move, and to allow the leadership of Hamas to be underground. This is again the last. Look at the size. I don't know if any of you are Hebrew readers, but the ending was interesting because it was in Hebrew, and it's written in Hebrew. It says, your future awaits its death if you enter Gaza. What they were trying to do was to get the Israeli army to come into Gaza on a ground invasion, and then they were seeing, we're going to trap them. Now, again, if you remember, you saw the guy laying wires, they're all explosives. I think that video gives you a number of things. It gives you an extent of the size of the operation underground that Israel was dealing with. As many of you will probably know, what happened was Israel bluffed a situation where we made Hamas believe we were going in by on the ground. Effectively, they got their anti-tank troops out, ready to go. Israel managed to destroy those troops, and then all the leadership and the fighters went underground, where Israel then bombed the underground tunnels, and they conveniently were neutralized. So it backfired on them. That, I think gives you a very good idea of what is going on.
נפילה ישירה ברחוב חנה סנש בפתח תקווה.
One last thing before we open up to questions. If we said that there was about 4 or 5 different events coming together, the Ramadan, the internal politics, the cancellation of the elections, an excuse which would have been Sheikh Jarrah. I think incitement by the far right within Israel, certainly not contributing to the situation, that's for sure. And on the issue of Jerusalem, everything comes to a head, which enables Hamas, one, to succeed in taking the leadership of the Palestinian movement, two, taking on the Israeli army. They claim it a success, they always do. Three, igniting, and this is the last point I wanted to make, igniting the Israeli Arab community. What we saw, and I think is the most alarming part, was we saw violence within Israeli towns between Israeli Arabs and Jewish Arabs taking place. That violence is very problematic because at the end of the day, on the day after, Israelis and Arabs live together in mixed towns of Ramla, Bat Yam, Haifa, so on and so forth. What Hamas tried to do was to ignite the West Bank, it failed, and tried to ignite Israeli Arabs to be sympathetic towards them. We have seen violence, but I think with the help of the Israeli intelligence, there's been arrests of Israeli Arabs and of Jews involved in that violence. I think the situation again is getting back on control, under control. That was a very potentially a very dangerous situation as well. Other than that, not a lot happened in the last week in Israel. That's more or less where we are. I want to open it up a little bit to some questions and direct it slightly where you want to go with this. So Linda, I see the chat's been buzzing away while I've been addressing some of those points.
It has, Neil. And actually, there's a couple of questions that have come in regarding the media. It's sort of the perennial question and ongoing frustration that people have with the way that some of these outrageous lies that are being published in mainstream media, and also this new, seismic shift in terms of what's happening on social media. I mean, to think that young people especially are getting their news from TikTok is pretty disturbing and outrageous. So one of the questions has to do with what one woman is saying, this outrageous, of course, blatant lie that Israel is committing genocide. I know that you're going to be dealing with some of that in the breakout session, but perhaps for the benefit of everyone, you can at least address that one. I mean, what do we say? How do we counter inflammatory claims like genocide when we know what genocide really is, but that it's, everything is thrown against the wall and applied to Israel in these situations?
Look, the issue of genocide is a ridiculous claim. If Israel was committing genocide, why has the population figures of the Palestinians increased in the last decade, 20, 30, 40, 50 years? Israel isn't trying to wipe out ethnically the Palestinians. The opposite, their population is growing. And I would add, the Arab population of Jerusalem is also growing. We have Arabs now living in places like French Hill and so on and so forth. So again, this idea of ethnic cleansing or genocide is ridiculous. Israel warns people before they attack, warns even at the risk of giving Hamas a heads up, where it's going to be targeting. So this idea of genocide, I think, is a ridiculous claim, and not only a ridiculous claim, actually undermines real genocide. Whether it was the genocide in Rwanda a few years back, or genocide that continues to happen. And again, as you suggested, I think it's propaganda, which is easily dismissed by one, the population figures, and two, the policy, which is warning people before you bomb them. Our problem has always been that Hamas will use its own population to protect its own troops, whereas Israel will use its troops to protect its own population. And I think that that's an important difference between us.
Thank you. Zev Sherrill is asking about, in your opinion, is how we will look back at this operation in a couple of years. And he refers also to one of the I think, the stunning developments in this latest conflict, which was the internal violence within mixed Israeli, Jewish and Arab towns and cities. I mean, can you talk about how we'll look back at this, and do you think that this strife and will it continue? Is this perhaps the most troubling, or one of the most troubling developments?
If we have a look at some of the scenes that took place, for example, if we have a look here, this was taking place in Akko, violence with Arab groups attacking Jews. This is exactly what you're talking about. Or we've got a lot of coverage, a Jewish group attacking a Muslim driver. Now, again, there's a couple of things which are going on. It's not clear on both of these sides whether they were people from the actual areas or people moving in, extremists moving in. What is clear is I think that we're seeing the mainstream, both on the Israeli side and mainstream on the Israeli Arab side, condemning that type of violence. Bottom line, we've got no choice. How are we going to see it? I think this was a test for Israeli society. We've got no choice but to live together, because we've got two people living in mixed towns and mixed areas. But I think these are the scenes that Hamas provokes. These are the scenes that Hamas wants. They want religious uprisings. They want religious hatred. They don't want a normalization of relationships between the two. So I'm not sure we're going to look back at this period with necessarily seeing it as the best time of relationship between Jews and Arabs, but maybe it's a lesson of where we nearly went to the brink, but we didn't quite go over it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. I'm turning to a couple of questions before we send everyone to breakout groups. There are a number of questions again about the media. I think there's a tremendous amount of frustration about how we can respond. When I say we, I'm actually referring to we who live here in the ways that we can engage. Lawrence Groffman is asking how should we respond to anti-Israel sentiment on social media or even in work situations? Does it pay? I mean, I'll take it a little further. Can we accomplish very much in engaging with people on social media, on Bella and Gigi Hadid's Twitter accounts, but people we don't know? I mean, does it work to just fling our arguments, our narrative back, or are there better ways for us to be making Israel's case?
Okay, so look, I think it's an interesting dilemma. What you mentioned at the beginning, I think, is important. The media itself has changed. I think since the time when, for example, you were an anchor on CNN to today, media is a totally different place. Today, everyone is with all respect, can be a journalist because they have a camera in their hand and can take the videos. More than that, we're seeing that many of the videos taken by your phone are being used by mainstream media. So it's a strange relationship. Look, but should we spend our time answering everything all the time? I do think it's worthwhile if there is a Facebook account, if there is a Twitter account, if there is a whatever account on whatever social media goes beyond the pale. In other words, it's not just criticism of Israel, but starts using the swastika to describe Israelis, calls Israelis Nazis, talks about genocide, etc. Then I think, yes, you can have an action, take action, which is to flag them and complain about those sites to the social media organization. Look, personally, I can't count the number of accounts I've brought down by complaining. So I think that Facebook especially is very aware of it. I think Twitter is aware of it. TikTok is less aware of it. But yes, by complaining, by flagging, by blocking, that's number one thing you can do. Number two, what I think you can do is also produce your own media. You don't necessarily have to be here. You can, I'm not going to say it, but everyone is reposting everyone else's videos. In Hebrew we read from right to left, so it's not copyright, but the right to copy. and we put up, you can put up other people's videos. I think it's important that our position, the pictures for example, that Michal showed you today, get seen. So an Israeli perspective is seen. And I think that is powerful. At the end of the day, we're not trying to convince those people who have a strong opinion in the opposite direction, but we are trying to challenge those people who can be drawn into opposing Israel. And that may be relatives of ours. If we come back to that question, I thought it was a good question about what's the turning point. One of the turning points we're seeing is the size of demonstrations against Israel, and the people involved are linking it to organizations like Black Lives Matter, the environment. If you support Black Lives Matter, if you support the environment, if you support, then you're anti-Israel. That's the challenge that Israel's facing today. And I think that we have to show, and there's a session we're running on how to be progressive and support Israel. I think that's a really, really important topic to be discussing. And we're seeing a generational change where people who don't, are not in the 50s, not in the 60s, not in the 70s, people who don't remember Israel under attack, don't remember the second Intifada, don't even remember 9/11, are now taking a stance on Israel. And slowly but surely, the 20s to 30-year-olds have got a very different position of towards Israel based on their understanding from basically the second Intifada.
So I want to address to some, there's a lot of good questions coming in, a bunch of them from adults that we can ask again in the session with you, Neil. So I don't want to think that friends and our members of that were ignoring questions, but I just want to let you know.
The opposite. It's always a problem with time. It's always
it is. We do have a little bit more time. Of course, it's harder when you're trying to make your arguments to friends on Facebook. I've heard of young people who've been unfriending their friends. They're reading comments from people who have been part of their social circles for years, and now we're seeing what they're putting out there, and it's causing enormous divisions, amongst friends and family members. I mean, again, I don't know if there's anything that you can guide us.
The number one thing I would do is I think there's a couple of things. One, listen, okay? I said something quickly and I come back to it before, which is this idea of understanding isn't agreeing. If someone talks to you about, the plight of the Palestinians, the suffering of the people in Gaza, you can empathize with it. You can say, your regular Palestinian in the Gaza Strip is in an awful situation. If you show you care, people will listen to you. Without showing that you care, they're not going to listen. So I think before you go on to what I call PR automatic, this idea of but you're allowed to say it's not losing the argument. The situation in Gaza, I don't think there's any Israeli, from Michal who lives on the border on the other side to me who lives in Jerusalem, nobody is happy about what's happening in Gaza. It's got to be better. And then start explaining what Hamas is and what they're doing. Look, today, I just try to keep a straight face when people say there's no money for Gaza. Qatar is, this week, they're sending a delegate again to donate millions upon millions of dollars. What Qatar is now trying to work out is how the hell do we get it to the people of Gaza and not to Hamas? So this idea of arguments within family, 100%, start from where they are. Don't cut them off. Don't get onto the explanation. Empathy and understanding of their feeling is crucial before you start giving them some of the arguments which may counter their value system.
Great advice. And I think bringing one's personal stories, right?
100%.
Those who may have spent time in a bomb shelter, who had 15 or 30 seconds to make it into a safe room, who have children who are studying in Tel Aviv or working in Tel Aviv, who can share stories from the front lines, to make it as personal as you can without just spouting talking points, I think is really, really important.
100%.
All great information, Neil. Thank you. I want to give us an opportunity to explore these questions in greater depth with you. At this point, I think we're going to break into our respective rooms. I promised the students earlier that I wasn't going to put them in rooms with their parents, and that is still true. We have people who are going to magically put everyone into the rooms that they pre-registered for. So just to review what those rooms are and who they're with. We have a session for students on making Israel's case as a liberal progressive, how to talk to liberal progressives. If you are someone who comes from a more leftist part of the political spectrum, how do you make your case, particularly in spaces where you want to be accepted but are being told to check your Zionism at the door. So that session, how to make Israel's case as a liberal progressive, is going to be held with Zach Schaefer, who is formerly with the Israel Action Network, today is working as the executive director of the Council of Young Jewish Presidents, an extraordinary advocate and spokesman, and he's going to be taking about 20 students into his room. We have a session with Blake Flayton, whose article we shared with you earlier, with the students at least earlier today, who has about a semester to go at George Washington University and has been on the front lines of progressive anti-Semitism at GW. It was the title of his op-ed piece, his guest essay in the New York Times a couple of years ago. Finally, we have a session on Inside the IDF, the ethics and morals that guide Israeli soldiers into combat. That session is being held with Dr. Tuvia Book, an educator. And finally, all the adults are going to be sent into another breakout room with Neil Lazarus for us to go point by point through the arguments that you can make to be able to stand up, we hope, with a little bit more clarity and confidence as you attempt to make Israel's case with friends and on social media. So I'm going to ask my colleagues, Jill and Shay, to please send us into our various rooms, and then we'll all meet afterwards and talk a little bit for a few minutes before we say goodbye. I think we are all back at this point, and I know that some people, certainly in the breakout room that I was in, were cut off mid-sentence. I'm so sorry for that to the folks in Neil Lazarus's room. There's so many good questions out there, and I had a chance to visit some of the other breakout rooms, and I'm sure the same is true in those rooms as well. Clearly, in an hour and a half, we're not going to get to everybody's questions, and this is a really, really complicated story, and nothing that we're going to be able to tackle entirely on this session. We are going to be sending you out some recommended reading books, good articles that I think is going to help to deepen your understanding of these really complex issues and help inform your positions, and hopefully give you some ammunition as you attempt to make Israel's case with your friends, with your communities, online and offline. I want to thank our speakers for being here today. I'm not sure if I mentioned this at the beginning, but we have two of them, Neil Lazarus and Tuvia Book, who are in Israel. So it's they're on Israel time. It's really late. It's about 12:30, right? 25 to 1 in Israel. So I have to applaud you, commend you for being as sharp.
That's why we like the East Coast. The West Coast is much harder. They do 3 o'clock in the morning.
I know you're kind of doing it all over the planet, and that's just the East Coast and West Coast of the United States. You're
better
another...
doing the East Coast in Australia. They're 14 hours different. So
oh
this
my
is
God.
actually, yeah.
Yeah, the two of you and others, of course, many others in Israel are hugely in demand, and we really thank you for your service, for being with us at all hours of the day and night. I want to say to everybody on the Zoom call today that, first of all, there's a couple of opportunities for students and for your children and your grandchildren in the coming months. We have our Israel Engagement Fellowships for 11th and 12th graders. That's happening, going to happen at the beginning of next year, but recruitment is going to start in the fall. And we are currently looking for rising juniors. So you're currently in 10th grade. You can start applying for the Right On for Israel program. This is a 2-year Israel engagement leadership training program to prepare you for the conversations you're going to have on college campuses to position you for leadership on your campus. This also includes a trip to Israel. So I invite you, we're going to send out links to those 2 programs so that you can either apply or direct your children and grandchildren to apply. And again, we'll send out additional information to everybody else. I want to thank you all, speakers and audience, members of our community, for being with us today, for caring as much as you do to be here on a beautiful Sunday afternoon, for standing with our community in support of our beloved state of Israel. Thank you. Have a good rest of your afternoon, everyone.